The vast silence of existence itself was shattered. Before even the concept of time dared to breathe, there was a king. Not a king crowned by ceremony or celebrated by the masses. This was a being forged from something older than creation itself, a soul carrying a weight that the gods had never learned to measure. He stood at the center of everything, surrounded on all sides by divine authority, celestial power that could unmake worlds with a single exhaled breath. The supreme angels flanked him. The destroyers watched from elevated positions, their auras burning like dying stars. And above them all, small in frame yet infinite in presence, the King of all things stared downward with those ancient, unreadable eyes. The supreme angel stepped forward, his white robes undisturbed despite the crackling energy filling every corner of that divine space. His voice carried no rage, no hatred, only the cold indifference of absolute authority. She endured erasure. The question now is whether you, who call yourself a king, can survive total annihilation. The condemned king did not flinch. He did not beg. He simply stood there, spine straight, that ancient pride radiating from him like heat from a collapsing sun. Daishinkan and all the divine angels moved in unison, their halos burning white-hot, their combined energy forming a lattice of light so dense it distorted reality itself. Then the King of all things raised his small hand. What followed was not an explosion. It was an erasure. The supreme divine annihilation, a technique designed not to wound, not to defeat, but to remove a being's very essence from existence entirely. The light engulfed the king completely, and yet, in the final half-second before his physical form dissolved, something extraordinary happened. Not a scream, not a curse. Instead, the corners of his lips curved upward. His eyes closed slowly, peacefully, as though he were simply choosing to sleep. In a voice so quiet that no divine ear could catch it, he whispered into the collapsing void. The flesh breaks, the will does not. You may erase what you can see, arrogant gods, but what you cannot see cannot be erased. Every god confirmed it. Every angel extended their senses across the furthest reaches of existence and found nothing, no trace, no residue, no fragment. They believed they had succeeded completely. What none of them could detect was the truth hiding in the deepest layer of that king's being. His soul had not been erased. It had simply moved, like a flame transferred from one wick to another before the first was extinguished. His consciousness retreated into the void between dimensions, into that lightless space where even divine energy could not reach. There he waited, patient, utterly still, however long it took. Because kings do not die, they simply wait for the right throne. Countless millennia unraveled, and the universe moved forward as universes do, indifferent to ancient grudges sleeping in the dark between stars. In the seventh universe, a small silver capsule tumbled silently through the void. Inside it, curled in the sleep of the very young, was a Saiyan infant with wild dark hair and that signature stubborn furrow already pressing faint lines between his tiny brows. His name was Kakarot. His parents were dead. His planet was gone, destroyed by an emperor who killed worlds the way ordinary beings swatted insects. The capsule carried him toward a distant blue planet, coordinates locked in by a father who had no other options left. But the universe had a different trajectory in mind. Far above every universe, in the gleaming corridors of the celestial palace, the king of everything was profoundly bored, He had watched every tournament worth watching. He had erased and created realms on a whim. He wanted a friend, not a divine companion who measured every word before speaking, but someone real, someone with fire in their blood, a warrior with enough raw, unpolished potential to actually surprise him. Daishinkan searched every corner of the multiverse. Candidates were presented one by one. Warriors, prodigies, chosen ones from 100 civilizations. The king dismissed each with a wave of his small hand. Then Daishinkan's gaze drifted toward that tumbling silver capsule. He explained the child's situation quietly. The destroyed planet, the dead parents, the infant alone in the dark between stars. Something shifted in those ancient eyes. That one. The capsule vanished from the seventh universe and reappeared in the Celestial Palace receiving chamber. The child inside had not even stirred. Kakarot opened his eyes in a palace made of light, and the most improbable upbringing in the history of all 12 universes began. The king watched Kakarot eat with the ferocity of a small animal, stumble through palace corridors with fearless curiosity, and stare at divine constructs with wide eyes and absolutely zero reverence. He laughed, genuinely, deeply, in a way his palace had not heard in longer than most civilizations had existed. Training was assigned to the Supreme Angel himself. Under his guidance, Kakarot began learning not the basic divine arts that mortal warriors sometimes glimpsed at the ceiling of their potential, but the real things, the foundational forces underpinning all existence. The boy was extraordinary. His Saiyan biology responded to divine training the way dry wood responds to flame, rapidly, completely, irreversibly. He achieved Super Saiyan God within a time frame that should have been impossible. The crimson aura that enveloped him during that first transformation lit the training chamber with warmth that felt almost out of place in that sterile, perfect space. But Kakarot barely paused to appreciate it. He was already pushing further, already asking what came next. 3 remarkable sisters accelerated everything. Vados, Margarita, and their eldest, a figure who appeared ageless and carried knowledge that even the Supreme Angel had never documented, took to Kakarot with an ease that surprised everyone, including themselves. He called the eldest Big Sis with such natural warmth that she stopped correcting him after the second attempt. What the sisters shared were not techniques in any conventional sense, but perspectives, ways of moving through divine energy that each had developed across incomprehensibly long lifetimes, knowledge so personal it existed nowhere in any divine text. Kakarot absorbed everything with focused gratitude that made all 3 sisters quietly invest more and more in his growth. The god of destruction who governed his birth universe watched his development with something approaching maternal pride. She sat beside him during breaks in training, asked about his progress with genuine interest. For Kakarot, who had grown up without a mother and been sent alone across space as an infant, that quiet warmth meant more than any of them fully understood. Then the king of everything placed something in his palm. A seed, tiny, weightless, but Kakarot felt the absolute primordial quality of it the moment it touched his skin. Something that existed before creation had settled on its current rules. If you confuse that with what you already carry, the king said simply, you will be something none of us have seen before. Kakarot closed his fingers around it and went into the angel's time chamber. He did not rush. He worked with the patience of someone who understood that what he was attempting was genuinely unprecedented, fusing divine angelic energy with the consuming force of destruction, then anchoring both with that primordial essence of the king himself. Every divine theory said it was impossible.
The first dozen attempts left the chamber scorched and Kakarot flat on his back, his body trembling from forces that wanted to annihilate each other rather than coexist. He got up every time, changed the approach, tried again. Then, one impossible day, the three energies stopped fighting each other. They recognized the will imposing itself upon them as absolute, divine purity, volcanic destruction, and beneath both, that ancient primordial seed wrapping around them, anchoring them into a unified whole. When Kakarot walked out of the time chamber, the light surrounding him had no name in any language. Every angel paused mid-movement. Every god of destruction across all 12 universes looked upward instinctively, the way animals sense a change in weather before clouds appear. The king of everything opened both eyes fully, something he rarely did, and sat completely still.
Kakarot had never lost awareness of where he came from. The palace, the divine training, the sisters' warmth, none of it had erased the memory of Frieza's cruelty. It had simply given him the means to answer it properly. He carried no rage, no consuming obsession. What settled in his bones was colder and more purposeful, a certainty that reckoning was not a possibility, but an inevitability. He had simply been patient. Now the patience was finished. He appeared at the gates of Frieza's imperial stronghold without warning, without announcement. A guard noticed the solitary figure and assumed, with the casual arrogance of someone serving the universe's most feared emperor, that this was another desperate fool. "You lost? If you're here to beg for a place in Lord Frieza's army." Kakarot did not break his stride. The guard was gone. Then three more. The energy he used was so perfectly controlled it made no sound, no explosion, no visible blast. The soldiers simply ceased to be present with clinical, absolute precision. Frieza descended to the main hall already in his final form because something about the approaching key signature had triggered an instinct his pride refused to call fear. He looked at the young warrior standing in the devastated entrance corridor with practiced contempt. "Whatever parlor trick you—" "My name is Kakarot." The voice was even, unhurried, carrying authority that had nothing to do with volume. "I am the son of the Saiyan who died fighting your soldiers to his last breath, trying to save our home." He met the Emperor's eyes directly. "I came to collect what is owed." Frieza did not finish his response. Kakarot crossed the distance between them in a movement Frieza's battle-trained eyes genuinely could not track. The impact was precise and overwhelming. The Emperor slammed into the far wall with a force that buckled reinforced structure, the crash reverberating through every corridor. Kakarot stood above him, expression unchanged. "Look at this face. Memorize it." Before Frieza could recover, Kakarot turned. King Cold, the towering patriarch of the imperial dynasty, had descended from above, enormous hand already raised. Kakarot extended 2 fingers. A single thread of energy, thin as wire and absolute precision, crossed the hall and went straight through King Cold's chest. The great patriarch fell without a word. Frieza stared at his father's body. Something cracked behind those cold eyes. Not grief at first, but pure disbelieving shock. Kakarot drew his gaze back. "When you killed my father, you destroyed a world to do it. I killed yours while he stood in front of me." A pause. "Now fight me with everything you have. It won't matter, but I'll give you the dignity of using it." Frieza erupted, 100%, golden aura blazing to absolute peak, raw power shaking the planet's crust. He attacked with techniques that had ended civilizations, moved with the speed of someone who had never truly been pushed to his limit. Kakarot deflected everything, not blocked, deflected, redirected, adjusted with an ease more humiliating than any words could have been.
Each counter left Frieza more damaged, more exhausted, more disbelieving. In final desperation, Frieza drove every remaining fragment of his power into the planet's core. The world tore itself apart. He fled to the debris field in space. His race survived vacuum. Kakarot could not.
He looked for a body among the spinning wreckage. Instead, he found eyes. Kakarot floated in the void without effort, without any indication that the absence of atmosphere presented any challenge whatsoever. The same quiet calm, the same absolute stillness. The being your entire empire feared most, the destroyer of Universe 7, kneels in my presence, Kakarot said, his voice carrying perfectly through the vacuum. You spent your whole existence terrifying everyone around you, and you couldn't sense what was standing in front of you. In his palm, a sphere formed, growing, darkening, pulling light inward. Frieza recognized the shape, recognized the specific geometry of that deadly construction. It was identical in every detail to the attack that had ended Planet Vegeta. The sphere was released without ceremony. Frieza was gone. In the same way he had ended 1,000 worlds. No last words, no dramatic speech, simply erased. 3 Saiyans stood on an isolated planet and tried to process what they were seeing. Vegeta, Nappa, and Raditz had received the distress communications. They understood from the fragmentary, increasingly panicked reports that something extraordinary was systematically dismantling Frieza's forces. They assembled their pride and faced whatever was coming head-on. When Kakarot landed before them, their scouters failed entirely, no reference point for what they were attempting to measure. They took combat stances. Then he spoke his name, and everything shifted. Raditz stared at his younger brother's face, older now, carrying something in the eyes that felt vast and settled. He had no words. Vegeta said nothing. Behind his carefully controlled expression, something was moving that his pride had no mechanism for handling. He extended his senses as far as they would reach and found no ceiling, no limit, no measuring point at all. The rage that rose in him was enormous and completely helpless. Kakarot laid out his intentions. For Raditz, the 6th universe, a position of genuine authority among the Saiyans of that world, a life that was actually his. For Nappa, a destiny where his strength would finally meet equals. For Vegeta, he paused and looked at the prince directly. I know what you saw. What happened to your father? You have never had revenge because you never had the power. That changes. A beat of silence. Margarita will train you. When you are truly ready, the choice of what to do with that strength belongs entirely to you. Vegeta looked away, jaw tight. One word, barely audible. Fine. Margarita descended shortly after, silver hair undisturbed, regarding the Saiyan prince with quiet curiosity. Vegeta met her gaze with all the dignity he could assemble. Kakarot and Raditz crossed into the other world. In a corner of paradise that felt genuinely peaceful, 2 people were waiting. Jean moved toward her sons immediately, face already crumbling, certain they had died. Kakarot caught her hands gently.
We're not dead, Mom. She stopped, stared at his face, at whatever had settled behind his eyes. Kakarot showed his father everything, not through words alone, but through something more complete. Images, weight, the truth of what had happened across all those years. Bardock watched it all with absolute stillness, arms crossed, that permanent scar above his eye unchanged. When it finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then a slow, completely real smile crossed his face. You did it right, Bardock said simply. Kakarot offered them everything: resurrection, godhood, any universe they chose. Bardock and Jinne looked at each other, and the answer needed no discussion. We have peace here, Jinne said softly, placing her palm briefly against her son's face. Real peace. We don't need anything else. We're proud of you. That's enough. Raditz chose differently. The idea of training under a goddess of destruction in the second universe and the king's personal assurance that she was both powerful and exceptionally warm struck him as exactly the life he had been owed. He grinned genuinely for what felt like the first time, embraced his mother, and did not look back. When Kakarot emerged into the living world alone, the multiverse was quieter than it had been in a very long time. The Empire was gone. His family was settled. The debt was paid. He rose slowly through the atmosphere and looked outward across the vast, breathing expanse of the seventh universe, that complicated, beautiful place that had once sent a small silver capsule tumbling through its darkness, carrying a child with no idea what was waiting at the other end. Far away in the celestial palace, the king of everything was watching, smiling in that way that managed to look simultaneously like a child who'd just seen something wonderful and something far older than any child had any right to be. The story was not over. It had, in the truest sense, only just begun.
But Kakarot had not forgotten what it meant to fight. That fire had never left him. It burned hotter now than it had ever had, and it demanded to be tested against something worthy. That was why he traveled to Universe 11's planet of destruction. The landscape was brutal and beautiful in equal measure. Jagged rock formations stretched toward a sky bruised with violet and gray, the air itself thick with residual energy from thousands of training sessions that had scorched the ground black. At the center of it all stood Vegeta, his arms crossed, his ki radiating outward in steady rhythmic pulses like a war drum. Margarita stood several paces back, her silver hair drifting in the charged wind, her expression serene, but her eyes sharp and observant as always. Vegeta did not turn when Kakarot arrived. He didn't need to. He could feel him, that enormous, suffocating pressure that preceded Kakarot like a storm front. Once upon a time, that pressure would have made Vegeta's blood run cold. Now, it made his lips curl upward. "You actually came," Vegeta said, his voice carrying that familiar edge of pride sharpened over years of relentless self-improvement. "I heard you'd been training hard," Kakarot replied, descending slowly, landing a few meters with the kind of casual grace that only the truly powerful can afford. Vegeta finally turned, and the look in his eyes said everything. Not hostility, not entirely. It was something more complex, a rivalry so deep it had become the very engine of his existence. "Then stop talking and evaluate me properly." The moment Vegeta moved, the planet screamed. His first strike came with a speed that would have been invisible to any mortal eye, a burst of ki-enhanced movement that closed the distance in less than a heartbeat. His fist connected with Kakarot's guard, and the resulting shockwave tore through the ground beneath them, splitting the stone outward in concentric rings like a crater being born in real time. Kakarot slid back 3 steps that meant nothing in terms of damage, but everything in terms of acknowledgement. He was genuinely impressed. What followed was not a simple sparring session. It was a war between 2 of the most powerful Saiyans to have ever existed. One who had ascended to near divine authority, and one who had carved his power from nothing but refusal and rage. Vegeta's strikes were no longer the calculated, precise attacks of a tactician, though that element remained. They had become something primal, infused with an intensity born from countless hours of
pushing past his limits in solitude, with only Margarita's guidance and his own iron pride to keep him moving forward. He unleashed combinations that staggered the atmosphere, fists, ki blasts, rapid footwork that blurred the line between physical combat and energy warfare. The planet's surface fractured in waves. Rock formations that had stood for millennia crumbled and were vaporized. Margarita quietly stepped back further, her expression still calm, but her fingers tightening slightly around her staff. Kakarot blocked, absorbed, redirected, and smiled. It was a genuine smile, the kind that only appeared when he found something that truly excited him. Vegeta's power was extraordinary. It had grown in ways that genuinely challenged Kakarot's perceptions, and for a moment, just a moment, the fight had a real weight to it. But then Kakarot shifted. It was subtle at first. His stance changed almost imperceptibly. The pressure emanating from him deepened, becoming not just heavy, but absolute. The kind of power that didn't just press down on the body, it pressed down on the soul. Vegeta felt it like a wall materializing in front of him. He gritted his teeth and pushed harder, pouring everything he had into the next exchange with a roar that could have cracked the sky. It wasn't enough. Kakarot's counter was devastatingly clean, not cruel, but final. A single movement that dismantled Vegeta's offensive completely and sent the Saiyan Prince crashing into the ground with enough force to leave a trench 50 meters long carved into the planet's surface. The dust settled slowly. Vegeta lay at the bottom of the crater, staring upward at a sky that seemed to tilt above him. He was not unconscious. That would have been easier. He was perfectly, agonizingly aware of every detail of what had just happened. His chest heaved with exhausted breaths, his knuckles scraped and bleeding from the intensity of the exchange, curled slowly into fists against the dirt. The silence around him was worse than any taunt Kakarot could have offered. To be surpassed by another Saiyan, not by a god, not by a celestial being, but someone who had stood at the same starting point as him, was a wound that no senzu being could touch. Vegeta was powerful beyond what any mortal should have been capable of achieving. He wielded the energy of destruction with a mastery that made divine beings pause. And still, it was not enough. He was number 2. Again, always number 2. He pushed himself upright without a word, brushing the dust from his armor with the stiff, deliberate movements of a man refusing to let his body language betray what was happening inside him. Kakarot extended a hand downward into the crater. "You've gotten incredibly strong, Vegeta. Stronger than I expected." Vegeta looked at the offered hand for a long moment. Then he took it and let himself be pulled up. "Don't patronize me, Kakarot." "I'm not." And the quiet sincerity in Kakarot's voice made it worse somehow. Kakarot said there was something that needed to be finished, something long overdue. Vegeta said nothing. He simply followed because somewhere deep beneath his pride, he already knew where they were going. The other world had its own atmosphere, a realm suspended between existence and memory, where the dead waited in whatever state their lives had left them. As the two Saiyans descended through its outer boundary, the temperature of the air seemed to change, taking on a quality that was neither warm nor cold, but simply timeless. Frieza's cocoon hung in the darkness like a grotesque ornament. The figure inside was visible through its translucent shell, the emperor of the universe, or what he once had been, suspended in an endless cycle of pain that had become his permanent residence.
Even in suffering, even stripped of everything, the arrogance had not fully left his face. It clung to him like a second skin, the last remnant of an empire that no longer existed. When he sensed them approaching, his eyes opened, and when he saw who had come, Kakarot standing before him like a judgment rendered in flesh, and Vegeta walking beside him with the quiet authority of someone who had arrived to end this, the arrogance finally cracked. Just slightly, just enough. "What is this?" Frieza's voice was tighter than it intended. The hatred was there, it would always be there, but underneath it was something he would never willingly name. "You've come to gloat, have you? How utterly predictable." "I haven't come to gloat," Kakarot said simply. His voice was even, without malice, which somehow made it worse. "And Vegeta," he glanced sideways at the Saiyan prince, "came to end this." Vegeta stepped forward. The purple-black energy of Hakai began to gather around his hand, building slowly, deliberately, not with the recklessness of rage, but with the focused intention of someone who had waited a long time for this moment and intended to experience every second of it.
The energy coiled around his fingers like living darkness, and its presence alone made the space around them seem to compress, as though reality itself was recoiling. Frieza's eyes fixed on that energy. Something moved behind them. Recognition, understanding, and beneath both of those things, a fear he would have died before admitting to. "You wouldn't dare!" "I am nearly a god of destruction," Vegeta said, his voice low and absolutely calm. "I have mastered the energy of erasure, and I have thought about this moment for a very long time." The memories came unbidden and brutal. A child prince pulled from his throne, a conquered planet, a lifetime of servitude dressed as alliance, humiliations piled upon humiliations until they had become the very architecture of his identity. Every scar, every command obeyed through gritted teeth, every moment he had been forced to kneel. It all converged behind his eyes as he looked at the being responsible for all of it. Frieza opened his mouth again, but Vegeta was already moving. The Hakai detonated outward in a consuming wave. There was no explosion in the traditional sense, no fire, no shock wave, no debris. There was simply presence, and then absence. The cocoon dissolved. The form within it dissolved. The energy that had sustained his consciousness for all these years was unmade at its very root, scraped from existence with a thoroughness that left nothing, not memory, not echo, not the faintest residual trace. Frieza was gone, completely, permanently. Vegeta stood in the empty space where the cocoon had been, his hand still extended, the last wisps of purple-black energy fading from his fingers. He said nothing for a long time. Then his arm lowered slowly, and something in the set of his shoulders changed, not relaxed exactly, but released, like a knot that had been pulled tight for decades had finally, quietly come undone. He turned away without another word. Kakarot followed in silence, understanding that some moments did not require commentary. Universe 7's planet of destruction looked exactly as it always had, a realm where time moved at the pace of its occupants' indifference. Beerus was asleep on his oversized throne, wrapped in a cocoon of blankets, his cat ears twitching faintly with whatever dreams occupied a god of destruction's unconscious mind. Whis stood nearby with his usual expression of mild amusement, which shifted almost imperceptibly when he sensed the two arrivals materializing from the void. Beerus did not wake easily. He never did.
It took 3 increasingly pointed disturbances before his eyes cracked open, gold irises flickering with irritation as his gaze swept the room and landed on the 2 Saiyans standing before him. "Oh," he said, his voice thick with sleep. "What do you 2 want? I was having a very satisfying dream." Then the pressure registered. Beerus was a god of destruction. His ability to sense power was as natural as breathing, and what he was sensing now from Kakarot was not what it had been the last time they had met. It was not comparable to before. It was categorically, fundamentally different, something that made his instincts, honed over millions of years of divine authority, send a very clear and very uncomfortable signal up his spine. He sat upright slowly. The irritation was still there, but something else had arrived alongside it. "Kakarot," Beerus said carefully, "your energy is different," Kakarot confirmed. "A lot has happened." The fight that followed was not the same as any battle Beerus had experienced in his long tenure as Universe 7's destroyer. He was not accustomed to being on the losing side. The very concept was architecturally foreign to him. Gods of destruction did not lose. They erased, they judged, they decided the fate of planets and species with the casual authority of someone changing the channel. To be pushed backward, to feel his techniques absorbed and dismantled, to find his own Hakai countered and neutralized by a being who wore divinity like it had always been his natural state, it was deeply, fundamentally wrong in a way that went beyond wounded pride. But it was happening. And Vegeta, who had once fought desperately just to survive a training session with Beerus, who had endured indignities at the ends of the hands that he would never fully forgive, was the one who delivered the finishing blow. It was clean, controlled, and absolutely humiliating. When the dust cleared, Beerus was on the ground, staring up at the ceiling of his own planet with the expression of someone whose entire self-conception had just been surgically removed. Kakarot stood over him, not with cruelty, never with cruelty, but with the quiet authority of someone delivering a verdict. "You will remain alive, but the title is gone. Your universe will not be yours to govern anymore. And your wounds," he glanced at the injuries the fight had left, "will not be healed by your angel." It was a punishment more elegant than death, to continue existing, stripped of everything that had defined that existence, unable to reclaim what had been taken, for a being of
Beerus's pride. It was a sentence that would echo through every moment of every day for the rest of his endless life. Vegeta was appointed in his place, the new god of destruction of Universe 7. He received the declaration without ceremony, with only the slight deepening of his expression acknowledging the weight of what had just been placed on him. Back in the Celestial Palace, the atmosphere was unlike anything that ancient hall had ever contained. The Grand Priest stood at his post with his characteristic unreadable stillness. Zeno, both of them, sat on their throne, and the smaller of the two was swinging his legs with the unrestrained enthusiasm of a child who had just watched the most entertaining performance of his long, incomprehensible life. "Kakarot," one of the kings clapped his tiny hands together. "That was wonderful! You and your prince friend made everything so interesting today." The voice carried the strange bell-like quality it always had, utterly cheerful, entirely genuine, and completely terrifying in the way that only absolute power can be. "I want to give you something special as a reward." Kakarot stood before the throne and waited. He had learned in his time among the divine that waiting was often wiser than speaking. "The 6 universes I erased a long time ago, universes 13 through 18, Zeno continued, still swinging his legs. "I'll let you have them. You'll be their king. You can make all the rules, choose whoever you want, do whatever you think is best." A pause, and then the brilliant, simple smile. "I think you'll be fun to watch." The weight of what was being offered settled across the room slowly, the way that truly enormous things do, not with a crash, but with a gradual, unstoppable accumulation. 6 universes, restored and governed by a single Saiyan warrior who once trained in a weighted shirt on a planet with 10 times Earth's gravity. Kakarot took a breath. Then he bowed his head with the deep, genuine respect he reserved for things that actually warranted it. But restoration required the Super Dragon Balls, and governing 6 universes required more than power alone. It required structure, it required loyalty, and above everything else, it required someone at his side who could be the axis around which that new cosmic order rotated, the role Daishinkan occupied for the kings, a supreme priestess, an anchor. 3 names crystallized in his mind with the immediacy of absolute certainty: Vados, Margarita, and their eldest sister, the one whose power and experience dwarfed both of them, whose name carried weight even in circles where angels were ordinary. He summoned all 3. When the 3 sisters materialized in the arena of the Divine Palace, they understood within moments what was being proposed. Kakarot explained the role, the title, the authority, and the proximity to power that it represented. And when he told the position would be decided through combat, the air in the arena shifted entirely. The eldest sister's expression was composed, almost amused. She had lived longer than most divine beings had existed. She had served, watched, guided, and surpassed. The idea of competing for a role rather than simply being appointed to it, to her, was a novelty she found unexpectedly appealing. Vados and Margarita exchanged a glance. It communicated everything that words would have taken minutes to express. They both understood that their sister was not simply the oldest. She was the most refined, the most dangerous, and the most capable of weaponizing centuries of experience in a single exchange. Facing her alone would be an extraordinarily poor decision. The battle began without fanfare. The eldest sister moved first, and the arena discovered immediately what it meant to be caught in the path of an angel who had stopped holding back. Her speed was a violation of the space she moved through. She didn't cross the distance between her starting position and her sisters. She simply ceased to exist in one place and became present in another, trailing a crescent of light so bright it left after images burned into the air. Her first combination targeted both sisters simultaneously with a precision that bordered on supernatural, because it was supernatural, the accumulated product of an existence measured in eons. The arena floor cracked in cascading patterns. Pillars that had stood in the palace since its construction groaned under the resonant shock waves. Vados was driven back 15 meters by a single redirected blow, her staff absorbing the impact with a crystalline shriek. Margarita hit the ground and rolled, narrowly converting the collision into a recovery, her silver hair fanning outward as she found her footing. The eldest sister pressed. She was magnificent and merciless in equal measure, her attacks flowing in seamless combinations that left no pause for counterplay, no moment of vulnerability, no angle of approach that wasn't already anticipated and defended. She dominated the center of the arena with the casual authority of someone who had always belonged there. But Vados had not survived as long as she had by relying solely on power. The look she exchanged with Margarita lasted less than a second. It was enough. Without a word spoken, a strategy assembled itself between them from pure shared understanding, the kind that only exists between siblings who have spent an eternity watching each other move.
Vados drove upward from the left, her staff generating a cascading arc of cutting energy that demanded her sister's guard be raised. Margarita drove upward from the right simultaneously, her kick carrying every gram of force she had left to give. The geometry was inescapable. To block one was to expose yourself completely to the other. The eldest sister blocked both, barely. The combined force drove her back for the first time in the fight, the ground beneath her feet splintering outward from the impact. "Cowards," she said, and her voice carried genuine indignation layered over something that almost sounded like appreciation. "Both of you against one. Do you have no dignity?" "The objective is to win," Vados replied, already moving again. "Dignity is for the unambitious." What followed was a siege. The eldest sister was extraordinary. She absorbed punishment that would have ended lesser beings, found counters to combinations that seemed airtight, and refused to yield ground without making her opponents pay dearly for every centimeter. But the relentless two-pronged pressure wore at her defenses in ways that solitary combat never would have. The final exchange was brief and total. Vados created a feint, a momentary hesitation in her own attack pattern designed to look like exhaustion, and when her sister committed to the counter, Margarita was already there, driving through the opening with everything she had. Their combined assault arrived simultaneously, and the eldest sister's defense, magnificent as it was, finally gave way. She was launched from the arena in a controlled catastrophe, landing outside its boundaries with an impact that shook the palace. She looked down at her own fist, pressed against the cracked floor beneath her, and was silent for a long moment. "That was a cowardly victory," she said, and Margarita replied softly, also breathing hard. "It was a victory." Then, almost against her will, a faint smile crossed the eldest sister's face. Yes, it was. The alliance between Vados and Margarita dissolved the instant the external threat was gone. They turned toward each other without hesitation, and the final duel was nothing like the tactical, layered combat they had just conducted. It was raw. Two sisters with nearly exhausted reserves throwing everything remaining at each other in a battle that shook the palace walls and drew genuine laughter from the kings above. The ending came not through power, but through Vados's mind. She had always possessed it, that extra dimension of tactical awareness that allowed her to read a fight not as a current event, but as an unfolding sequence. She saw Margarita's final attack before it was launched, manufactured the precise opening that would invite it, and in the moment of commitment, she moved around it with the efficiency of someone closing a door. Margarita hit the floor. She looked up at her sister, at the exhausted, victorious, quietly radiant face of the person who had just beaten her, and bowed her head. "You won," she said, with the cleanness of genuine acceptance. Vados lowered herself to one knee, breathing slowly, and looked toward where Kakarot stood at the edge of the arena. "Supreme Priestess of the New Realm," Kakarot said, and the title settled around her shoulders like armor forged to her exact dimensions. The defeated sisters approached him together afterward. There was no resentment in their posture, only a quiet, earnest request. They wished to leave their universes, to follow him, to be part of the new order being built in the restored cosmos. Kakarot looked at them for a moment, then he nodded. Zeno gave his blessing without hesitation. Of course he did. He found the entire situation delightful. The angels of the erased universes 16, 17, and 18 were assigned to fill the vacated positions in universes 10 and 11, maintaining the cosmic balance required for existence to function. The Super Dragon Balls were gathered with the combined effort of 4 beings whose individual capabilities made the collection process look almost effortless. Vados summoned the dragon, the great ancient entity that existed at a scale that made galaxies feel like grains of sand, and made her wish. Restore the 6 erased universes, return all life, all planets, all stars to their original state, with one condition, one specific race, a people who had dared to challenge the authority of the gods of destruction, who had raised their hands against those whose very purpose was divine judgment. They would not return. Their chapter was closed. Their names would not be written back into the cosmic record. The dragon granted the wish.
The 6 universes ignited back into existence, light cascading across 6 dead voids, stars reigniting, planets reforming, ecosystems blossoming back into being across the reconstructed canvases of universes 13 through 18. The cosmos exhaled. Kakarot watched it happen and felt something he hadn't expected. Not pride, not power, but something quieter, something that might have been purpose. He registered Vados' exclusion condition with a mild curiosity, a race that challenged the gods. He found he didn't dwell on it. The divine order had always dealt harshly with those who reached beyond their station. It was an ancient pattern, and it had little bearing on what needed to be built now.
He didn't know. He couldn't have known. The race that Vados had quietly, deliberately excised from the restored universes, the people she had chosen to leave permanently erased, was Saiyans. His people. The people he had been in a life that now felt like a story told about someone else. Vados had her reasons. She kept them close, behind eyes that revealed nothing. The new realm took shape gradually, each decision layered upon the last with the deliberate care of someone building something meant to last. Kakarot established his seat of governance in a palace that sat at the precise center of his 6-universe domain, a structure of his own design, stripped of the excess of divine architecture and built instead around the functional and the purposeful. He trained with Vados daily. She was an exceptional partner, technically refined in ways that challenged him even now, and intellectually several steps ahead of most beings he had ever encountered. Their sessions pushed both of them, and in the quiet intensity of those exchanges, something began to develop, a mutual understanding, a respect that went deeper than hierarchy. It was during one of these sessions that it happened. They were deep into an extended exchange, both of them pushing at their respective ceilings, when something shifted inside Kakarot. Not a transformation in the conventional sense. There were no physical markers, no bursting aura, no dramatic change in appearance. It was subtler and more disturbing than that. Something at his core that had been dormant, something ancient, buried under layers of divine awakening and cosmic reincarnation, stirred and opened its eyes. The energy that poured from him was not his usual divine key. It was older, wilder. It carried the resonance of a people who had fought gods and meant it, whose existence had been defined by the refusal to accept any ceiling, any authority, any ceiling imposed from above. It was Saiyan. Not the civilized, cultivated Saiyan energy of the warrior who had grown beyond his origins, but something raw, the primal inheritance of a species that had been feared enough to be erased. Vados stopped the moment she felt it. Every carefully maintained composure in her expression shifted, not into fear exactly, but into something very close to it, arriving fast and immediately suppressed. She raised her staff and generated the containment field before Kakarot fully registered what was happening. A dense, multi-layered barrier of angelic energy that sealed the immediate area against external detection, folding the resonance of his ki inside a shell that nothing outside could read. In the silence of the contained space, Kakarot stood with his eyes half closed, fractured memories pushing through the surface of his consciousness like rocks rising through floodwater. Faces he didn't recognize, battles against armies of gods, a war that had ended in absolute erasure, a people who had refused until the very end to accept that some things were beyond reach. He looked at Vados, and something in that look asked a question she wasn't ready to answer. "Vados," he said quietly, his voice carrying an edge it had never held before. "I don't know where these memories are coming from, but somewhere in them, you and I were not standing on the same side." Vados held his gaze. Her expression did not break. Her grip on her staff did not tighten. She was an angel,
and angels were the finest performers existence had ever produced when it came to composure under pressure. "You're accessing something deep," she said carefully. "Rest, let the memories settle. We can discuss this when your mind is clear." Kakarot said nothing more, but his eyes did not release her. And in the deepening quiet of the contained field, with 6 restored universes spinning gently beneath them, and a past that wasn't supposed to exist pressing against the boundaries of the present, the question remained, unanswered, but alive. And the story of what Kakarot would do when he finally remembered everything, that story had only just begun.
The kind that is left by an eraser who knew exactly what they were removing. His hand rose slowly, his key extended, not aggressively, but carefully, the way a surgeon touches a wound they aren't sure is fully closed. And in the space where a planet should have been, in the orbital path where a civilization should have hummed with life, he felt nothing. Not empty nothing. Deliberate nothing. Behind him, the soft sound of a staff touching stone. "You should rest," Vados said. Her voice was perfect, measured, calm, carrying exactly the right amount of concern. She had practiced it, he realized now. She had been practicing it for some time. He didn't turn around. How many of them were there? The silence that followed lasted exactly 2 seconds too long. Kakarot. How many Saiyans? Not a question. The inflection had left entirely. What remained was something flat and enormous, the voice of a man standing on the edge of a truth he could not yet see the bottom of. Vados said nothing. And in that nothing, in the silence of the supreme priestess of the new realm, the most composed being Kakarot had ever known, he finally had his answer. His eyes closed. When they opened again, they were not the eyes of a king. They were not the eyes of a god. They were the eyes of the last Saiyan, standing above 6 universes that had been scrubbed clean of his people, standing beside the woman who had done it, and understanding, for the first time, the true shape of the world she had built around him. The ki that rose from his body did not roar, it did not explode, it simply expanded, slow, total, and absolute, pressing outward in every direction, like a tide that had decided to stop being controlled. The palace walls trembled. In their chambers, the 2 kings looked up from whatever timeless thing occupied them, their eyes drifting toward the direction of the feeling without quite understanding what it meant. The grand priest's expression shifted, barely, almost nothing, but it shifted. And Vados, standing 3 meters behind the man she had served and deceived and protected and feared, raised her staff with hands that, for the first time in an existence measured in eons, were not entirely steady. To be continued. It had started with a tremor. Not in the ground, not in the air, in the energy itself. That invisible fabric of divine force that angels spent millennia weaving and maintaining across every universe. During a training session that should have been routine, a frequency had pulsed outward from Kakarot's core, brief, almost imperceptible, like a single forgotten note from an ancient song playing itself without permission. Vados had felt it before Kakarot did. She had gone still. Her silver hair, always perfectly composed, had not moved, but her eyes had shifted, just slightly, just enough for someone who truly knew her to see the weight that had suddenly landed on her shoulders. Kakarot noticed. He always noticed Vados. "You're not going to tell me this is normal," he said, his voice low, his breath still uneven from exertion. "No," she replied, "I'm not." She had looked at him then with an expression he had never seen from her before. Not the calm, analytical gaze of a teacher evaluating a student. Not the quiet pride she sometimes showed when he exceeded her expectations. This was something older, something that looked almost like guilt. "The memories you've been seeing," she began carefully, "are not hallucinations. They are not symptoms of overtraining or spiritual imbalance. Then what are they? They are yours." A pause. "They have always been yours." The air between them had gone very quiet. "Vados." His tone was measured, controlled, but she could feel the pressure building behind it. "You're telling me I've lived before." "I'm telling you that what you are goes back further than any version of you that currently exists." She turned fully to face him, and for the first time, Kakarot saw something that looked like genuine vulnerability in the face of the most composed being he had ever met. "The histories that are written before the King of Everything established the order that governs all universes, there was a war so complete, so devastating in its aftermath that the victors made a decision, not just to win, but to erase every trace of the losing side from the fabric of existence itself." Kakarot was quiet. The fragments, those burning images of a battlefield that existed nowhere he had ever been, of a people that looked like him but radiated power that he had never felt from any Saiyan, of a sky that was not the sky of any universe he recognized. All of it was suddenly not chaos. Suddenly, it was context. "I was their leader," he said. "It wasn't a question. You were their king." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of 10,000 years of carefully buried truth rising to the surface at once. And they were destroyed. Completely, or so it was believed. Vados's voice dropped just slightly. "There was one who could not be erased. The divine energy used to erase your people, it could not take hold of her. The King of Everything had no choice but to seal her away instead, lock her in a dimensional prison where she could neither act, nor die, nor fade." Kakarot's jaw tightened. The girl in the fragments, white hair catching a light that no longer existed, a tail the color of molten gold, eyes that looked at him across the distance of shattered time with a recognition that bypassed language entirely. "My sister," he said. "Her name is Kayan." Something cracked inside him, not violently, not the explosive fracture of battle damage. This was quieter. This was the sound of a wall that had been holding back an ocean, finally running out of reasons to stand. He had family, real family, existing, sealed in suffering in a cage built by the being he had once trusted above all others. "Where is she?" "Kakarot." "Vados." The word carried everything. "Where is she?" They never made it to the prison. The Omni Priest had been waiting. Looking back, Kakarot would understand that the tremor during training had not gone unnoticed. Nothing went unnoticed in the divine realm. Not a prayer, not a breath, not a fragment of forbidden energy pulsing from a soul that should have been gone from existence for 10,000 years. The Supreme Priest had felt it the moment it happened. He had simply taken the time to gather what he needed before making his appearance. When he stepped into the corridor where Kakarot and Vados were walking, he did not come alone. The hall filled silently, the way a room fills with cold before a storm, not dramatically, not with announcement, but with a certainty that changes the temperature of everything around it. Angels materialized from every universe, not 2 or 3, all of them, side by side, staffs present, expressions unified in purpose. and alongside them, positioned at the throne's edge with the stillness of someone who had already made peace with this moment, the king of everything sat. He looked smaller than Kakarot remembered. Not in size, he had always been small, but there had always been something in his eyes, that particular gleam of a being who found genuine joy in the universe around him that made his physical frame irrelevant. Standing near him had always felt like standing near the center of something vast and warm. The eyes were different now.
Flat, cold, decided. The Supreme Priest spoke without preamble. Vados, you concealed an enemy of divine order within the sacred realm. She didn't flinch. Her chin lifted slightly, and when she spoke, her voice was as steady as it had always been. Only now, the steadiness carried a different weight. Not composure, courage. I brought before you a being who deserved to be understood, not erased. The two are not in conflict, the priest replied calmly. We can understand him perfectly and still erase him. Kakarot stepped forward. He raised both hands, open, a gesture of transparency, showing them that he was not reaching for power, not preparing an attack. He was still trying, still giving them the chance to be what he had believed they were. I am not your enemy, he said, his gaze moving between the angels, the priest, and finally the king. Whatever I was in a life before this one, I have no war with any of you. I have fought beside you. I have bled in your defense. I consider every being in this hall to be... You consider... The king's voice, when it came, carried no warmth at all. That is the problem. You consider yourself part of something you were never permitted to be part of. The tiny figure regarded Kakarot with an expression that was not anger. Anger would have been something. This was removal, the emotional equivalent of crossing out a mistake. You were given an existence here through an oversight that ends today. Kakarot held the gaze. There was a grief in him that he hadn't expected to feel. He had prepared himself for conflict. He had not prepared himself for how much it would hurt to watch someone he loved look at him like a document to be corrected. Then let me make it simple, he said, and his voice had changed now, and quieter was somehow more powerful. Release my sister from her prison. Let us leave. Every universe continues as it was. No war, no disruption. We disappear, and you never see us again. The silence lasted exactly long enough to let him know the answer. Then Vados stepped to his side. Not behind him, not in front, directly beside him. It was the clearest statement she could make without speaking, and the Supreme Priest heard it perfectly.
Vados. His voice shifted on her name. For the first time, something other than authority moved through it, something that might have been, in a being capable of such things, disappointment. You understand what you are doing. Completely, she said. You are my daughter. I am my own conscience. The hall went absolutely still. Then the priest closed his eyes. One slow breath, and when he opened them again, he was done being her father. Contain them. The battle was not like the battles in the lower realms. There were no mountain ranges to collapse, no oceans to vaporize, no cities to flee from the collateral devastation. The divine realm had no such geography. What it had instead was structure, the invisible architecture of universal law made manifest in light and pressure, and the weight of accumulated divine authority pressing down from every direction at once. The angels attacked as a coordinated force, not as individuals.
They had trained together across eons. Their movements were unified like water flowing through a single channel, each strike designed to feed into the next, each burst of divine energy timed to eliminate any gap before it could be exploited. Against any other opponent, it would have been flawless. Kakarot was not any other opponent. He had trained with them, with all of them, one by one, across the years of his time in the divine realm. The angels had pushed him to his limits, and in doing so had taught him every angle of their approach, every preference in their technique, every habit they didn't know they had. He moved through their coordinated assault with the strange intimacy of someone who knew exactly where the next blow was coming from, not because he could predict it, but because he had felt it before, in a training room called practice. He was brutal without being reckless. Every movement was minimum necessary force applied with maximum precision. He wasn't trying to destroy them, not yet. He was trying to reach the door, to get to the prison, to get to Cayenne.
Vados fought differently. Where Kakarot was motion, she was stillness weaponized. Her staff moved in arcs that seemed almost lazy until the moment of contact when the force behind them became apparent. She was fighting her siblings, beings she had spent eternity alongside, and it showed in the hesitation that preceded each exchange. Not weakness, the opposite of weakness, actually. She chose every action with full awareness of what it cost her, and she chose it anyway. The Supreme Priest did not enter the battle immediately. He watched, evaluated, calculated the point at which his intervention would be most decisive. This was a pattern Kakarot recognized from their training sessions together. Dainan had always believed that the best technique was the one deployed at the exact right moment. When he finally moved, he moved fast. The collision between Kakarot and the Supreme Priest was felt across several universes. Gods of destruction who were nowhere near the divine realm still tilted their heads, sensing the disturbance without being able to identify it. The energy they exchanged was not the energy of mortals or even of standard divine beings. It was something older, something that resonated at frequencies the current divine order had no language for. For the first time in this confrontation, Kakarot bled. Not much, a thin line across his cheek, the result of a strike that grazed rather than connected. But it was enough to remind him that despite everything that had woken inside him, he was fighting the being who had once been his teacher in this body, in this life. Dainan had not wasted those years. He had used every moment of Kakarot's training to build a map of his student's combat mind, and now he was navigating that map with terrifying efficiency. "You are impressive," the priest said, his voice never losing its composure even as they traded blows at speeds that made the divine hall blur around them. "The ancient power has reasserted itself faster than I anticipated. But power without complete mastery is simply potential, and potential can be sealed." "Then try," Kakarot replied, and something in his eyes in that moment, something deep and cold and very, very old, made even the Supreme Priest pause for exactly 1 second. It was enough. Kakarot hit him with everything he had. Not a technique, not a refined divine application, pure force, carrying the full weight of his Saiyan nature and the awakening ancient power simultaneously. The two energies coexisting in his body in a way that should have been impossible, that the divine order had no framework for understanding, that produced something neither tradition could fully contain. The Supreme Priest went through 2 walls of the divine palace before stopping. In that same moment, Vados was overwhelmed.
3 angels coordinating with a precision only beings who had trained together for millennia could achieve, simultaneously stripped her staff away and locked divine energy chains around her limbs. She fought it. God, she fought it. But without her staff as a focus, her power bled into the chains instead of breaking them, feeding the very mechanism that bound her. She looked at Kakarot across the chaos. He was already looking at her. Then the chains around Vados began to glow white, and Kakarot understood what was coming, not binding, but erasure. They weren't going to imprison her, they were going to remove her from existence entirely. He moved before he thought. Every strategic calculation, every measured response, every careful effort to find a path through this without permanent consequences, all of it dissolved in the single moment of watching those chains begin to reach for the core of the woman who had stood beside him when every other being in the divine realm had chosen the other side. The energy that came out of him was not controlled. It was honest. It crashed through the hall like a physical thing, scattering angels, cracking the divine architecture, forcing even the returned supreme priest to brace himself against the wall. The chains around Vados shattered, not broken by technique, but dissolved by sheer concentrated force. She gasped, stabilized herself in the air, retrieved her staff. For a single moment, the hall was still. Then the king of everything made a sound. It wasn't a command, it wasn't anger. It was, somehow, the most terrible thing he could have produced in that moment. It was a sigh, small and quiet and final, like a being who has watched something for a long time and has decided he is done watching. The sealing technique that followed was unlike anything they had countered before. When consciousness returned, it arrived not all at once, but in pieces. First, the sound, or rather the absence of it, a silence so complete it had texture, not the silence of a quiet room, but the silence of a space that existed outside of the reach of any sound that had ever been made in any universe.
Then, the weight of the chains. Divine and immovable and patient in the way that only things designed to last forever could be patient. Kakarot was in the dimensional prison, the same one where Kain had been held for 10,000 years. Not the same cell. The king had enough awareness of the ancient power to keep them separated, but the same structure, the same suffocating architecture of divine isolation, the same quality of light that was not quite light, coming from no identifiable source, illuminating nothing clearly. He did not allow himself to panic. He examined the chains with careful attention, mapping their structure, feeling for weaknesses the way he had learned to feel for openings in an opponent's defense. There were no weaknesses. They had been built by the highest divine authority that existed, refined over 10,000 years of containing a power similar to his own. He pulled against them anyway. Nothing. He settled. He had time. Apparently, he had 10,000 years worth of time if the king's judgment held. And in the strange, suspended quality of isolation, thoughts that would have been drowned out by the noise of his normal existence began to surface. He thought about Vados, whether she was in a cell like this or something worse, whether they had finally done what they had threatened, removed her from the fabric of existence for the crime of choosing him. The thought created a specific kind of pain that had nothing to do with the chains or the isolation. It was the pain of a debt he couldn't repay to someone who hadn't asked for repayment. He thought about Kain. Somewhere in this same structure, she had been sitting in chains for 10 millennia. He tried to imagine it and found he couldn't, not really, not fully. His mind kept sliding away from the full scale of it, refusing to hold it. 10,000 years was a number that language could contain, but understanding couldn't. He thought about the king of everything.
the eyes, the sigh. He had believed, genuinely, completely believed, that what existed between them was real, that the warmth the king had shown him had been something beyond performance or calculation, that some things transcended the politics of divine order.
He had been wrong. And sitting in the dark, with chains made of 10,000 years' worth of divine intent wrapped around his limbs, Kakarot, warrior, Saiyan, ancient king, man who had believed in the fundamental goodness of the beings around him, dissolved. She stepped through it like she was passing through smoke. Margarita. The angel of Universe 11 looked nothing like she always had in the formal settings of the divine realm. Her usual composure was present, but altered. Underneath it, like light visible through a thin screen, something raw and urgent moved. She covered the distance between them quickly, her hands already raised, already working on the chains before a single word had been exchanged. "I know," she said, answering the question on his face before he could ask it. "I know what's happened. I know about your parents, your brother." Her hands didn't stop moving. "The king moved against everyone connected to you. Your parents in the divine realm, they're gone. Your brother in Universe 2 was erased." The weight of this didn't land immediately. It arrived in stages, each one slightly heavier than the last. His parents, gone. His brother, gone. Removed from existence by a being who smiled at him, played games with him, called him something approaching a friend. My sister.
Every single day. She didn't say it as a statement of sacrifice. She said it as a simple fact, the way someone describes what they did because there was nothing else to do. Neither of us has left the approach to this prison in a decade. A pause. I need you to know that. Whatever the next few minutes look like, I need you to know that you were never abandoned. He looked at her, and for a moment he had nothing. Margarita had always occupied a specific space in the landscape of his life in the divine realm, present, warm in the particular way that beings of her nature were warm, but never at the center of what he considered his closest connections. He had never fully understood her until this moment. Standing in front of her now with the evidence of 10 years of quiet, relentless devotion being dismantled link by link from his chains, he saw her clearly for the first time. "Margarita," he began. The first chain broke, and the seal activated. It was instantaneous and total, not a process, not something that built up gradually and could be interrupted. The moment the first seal was broken, the preset consequence triggered like a trap long since set and only now stepped on. The divine energy collapsed inward, and Margarita, still working, still focused, still fighting, was consumed by the light before she could react, before she could flee, before she could do anything except be exactly where she had chosen to be. Gone. One moment present, the next moment not. Not faded, not moved, not sealed. Erased. In the silence that followed, Kakarot did not move. The broken chain hung from his wrist, its free end dissolving where the seal had taken Margarita's energy. The other chains were still present. He was still bound. And then something happened that had never happened in this body, in this lifetime.
something that had not happened in the ancient life either, because the ancient Ting had been built for war and had never had the specific experience of losing someone in this particular way. Something inside Kakarot broke. Not in a metaphorical sense, in a structural sense. A fundamental partition that had existed between the man he had built himself into and the being he had originally been. The layering of two identities, two histories, two sets of losses carried across an impossible span of time. That partition collapsed. They merged completely. And what remained was neither Kakarot nor the ancient king in isolation. It was both, unified in a grief so vast and so cold that it had the quality of a decision rather than an emotion. The chains dissolved. Not broken, not forced open, dissolved, because the energy that now inhabited the space where Kakarot had been was no longer of the category that divine chains were built to contain. The sealing mechanisms measured his power and found the measurements insufficient to describe what they were measuring. They simply stopped functioning. He stood, and the dimensional prison, a structure built to hold a power that the entire might of the divine order had united to seal, cracked from floor to ceiling. "King of everything," he said, to no one, to the empty cell, to the 10,000 years of memory that now lived inside him, alongside everything he had accumulated in this life. His voice was very quiet. "I am coming." He found Kian first. The path through the dimensional prison was not straightforward. It had been designed as a labyrinth for exactly this kind of situation. But he moved through it with the strange certainty of someone who has been here before. Not in this body, not in this lifetime, but the ancient king had built this place, or something very like it, and the architectural logic of it lived in the memory that had fully opened inside him. When he found her cell, she was not what he had imagined. In the fragments, the memories, she had been vivid, bright, the kind of presence that commanded attention simply by existing. The girl with white hair and a golden tail who had stood at his side in a war that history tried to erase. The figure in the cell was none of those things. She was barely upright. The chains that bound her had, over 10 millennia, adjusted for every possible attempt of resistance she might have made. They had learned
Her, the way a prison learns its occupant over infinite repetition, and they reflected that knowledge in how completely they had wrapped themselves around her. Her head was down, her breathing was shallow and irregular. She looked like something that had been slowly, carefully, methodically drained of everything that made her what she was. And then she looked up. Even through the damage, even through 10,000 years of this, even through the emptiness that had settled over her features like a second skin, the eyes that met him carried something that had refused to die with everything else. Recognition. He didn't need words. He crossed the space between them and took hold of the chains, and this time there was no seal, no trap, no counter-mechanism, because the ancient king knew how to undo what the ancient king had built, and these chains had been built to his specifications in his era by hands following his command. They broke like they had been waiting to. She fell, and he caught her, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. He passed energy into her, carefully, enough to stabilize without overwhelming a system that had been running at minimum capacity for longer than most civilizations had existed. Slowly, she became aware of him. She raised one hand, touched his face, looked at him the way someone looks at something they had decided to stop hoping for. "You're real," she said. "I'm real." Something moved across her features, complex, unresolved, carrying 10,000 years of everything she had experienced in this cell, filtered through a mind that had been alone with it for all of that time. Then it simplified, became a single thing. She smiled. I knew you would come. Even when I stopped believing it would happen, some part of me knew. He held her there until the trembling stopped and her breathing steadied and her eyes found their focus again. Then he explained what lay ahead. Vados, still imprisoned, the divine realm above them, the war that had not finished yet. He watched her process it, watched her gather herself, watched the ancient warrior that existed beneath the damage begin to surface through sheer act of will. Then he told her about Vados, that she was an angel, that she was an ally. Kian's eyes went very still. What happened next moved faster than it should have, faster than anyone watching could have prepared for. Vados, when they reached her, was in worse condition than when Kakarot had last seen her. 10 years of imprisonment had taken something from the composure she normally wore like armor, and what remained was the person underneath the composure, raw and undefended, and somehow more real for it. When she saw Kakarot in his fully awakened form, she understood immediately what had happened to bring him here. The smile she gave him was genuine and exhausted and grateful in equal measure. Kian did not smile. The moment she was within range of Vados, of the divine energy that the angel radiated simply by existing, that ancient instinct that lived in the DNA of the forbidden race, registering the presence of the exact category of being that had driven them to extinction, every fragile piece of stability Kian had assembled in the last hour detonated simultaneously. She moved before Kakarot could process that she was going to move. The speed was extraordinary. 10,000 years of sitting in chains had done nothing to dull her reflexes, and the energy Kakarot had passed into her had fueled a body that was desperate to use it. She hit Vados 3 times before Kakarot could position himself between them, each impact carrying the specific, unrestrained force of someone fighting not a person but a category. He contained Kian, barely. She wasn't trying to escape him. Some part of her recognized him as her brother, even through the chaos, but the recognition was thin. And underneath it was a depth of accumulated psychological damage that 10,000 years had built and nothing had dismantled. She's your ally, he said, firm, present, treating her not like a damaged person who needed managing, but like a warrior who needed information. She stood beside me when the entire divine order turned. She lost her divine status to help us. She is on our side. Kian trembled. Her eyes moved between him and Vados. The conflict on her face was visible and real. Not stubbornness, not irrationality, but the product of a kind of suffering that fundamentally rewired how she processed the world. She turned away from Vados. I'm hungry, and I want to sleep. It was not resolution. It was the closest she could come to it, and Kakarot recognized the difference and honored it.
Then the supreme priest arrived. The pressure of his presence entered the space before he did. That particular weight that Kakarot had spent years learning to read, that he had once experienced as the gravity of a teacher and now experienced as something he needed to pass through rather than around. Dynan appeared with the absolute certainty of someone who has prepared for every possible version of this scenario and has concluded that all of them end the same way. He looked at Kakarot. He looked at the broken chains. He looked at the 2 women standing behind the man who should have been sealed for eternity. "This ends here," the priest said. "Yes,"
Kakarot agreed. It does. The fight that followed was the truest accounting of what Kakarot had become. Not the awakening in fragments, not the partial access that had manifested during the earlier battle in the Divine Hall. The complete thing. Both identities, both histories, both powers operating in unified purpose through a single body that had been trained for years by the greatest beings in the Divine Order. Dynan was a master. He had been a master for longer than most civilizations remembered existing. He adjusted with every exchange, recalculated, found new approaches with a flexibility that lesser beings could never have managed. For several minutes, the fight existed in genuine uncertainty, not because Kakarot was losing, but because the priest was skilled enough to prevent it from being simple. Vados, standing behind Kayan, watched something extraordinary happen. Kayan, against every instinct, against the entirety of her psychological experience, turned to Vados. "You said you had an idea," she said. Her voice was flat, controlled in the way that things are controlled when control is costing everything. Vados looked at her. "I said it would help your brother." "Then say it."
What Vados proposed was not conventional. The fusion of a member of the forbidden race with an angel was something that had no established precedent. The two energies were historically, philosophically, cosmically antithetical. The Divine Order would have called it impossible. The ancient king's people would have called it unthinkable. Which was, perhaps, why it worked. Violin emerged from the fusion like a storm system becoming aware of itself. The energy she radiated was paradoxical, divine authority and forbidden power simultaneously, each enhancing the other's quality in ways that neither could have achieved alone. Her eyes held two colors that had never been meant to occupy the same space. Her aura burned at frequencies that made the angels recoil before she had thrown a single strike. When she moved, the divine realm felt it. The battle that followed was the definition of chaos, Kakarot pressing the supreme priest with the combined force of his two selves, Violin tearing through the coordinated angel assault with the specific fury of two beings who had been caged too long and were done being careful about how they came out of it. And somewhere in the periphery, emerging through a gateway that opened in the floor of the divine realm with the specific energy signature of someone who had been tracking this situation from the outside and had waited until he understood exactly which side he needed to be on. Vegeta. He arrived with the presence he always carried, that particular gravity of a being whose pride had calcified over a lifetime into something indistinguishable from character. He surveyed the scene with eyes that took in everything in a single sweep. The supreme priest on one side, battered but standing, commanding the remaining angels of the divine order. Kakarot on the other, fully awakened, ancient and new simultaneously, fighting with a clarity and purpose that Vegeta had never seen from him before. He understood the situation completely. He chose. "Kakarot," he said. Kakarot, without breaking his engagement with Dianan, glanced sideways at the prince. "I was told," Vegeta continued, "that you see me as an ally." "I do." "Then let's finish this." The supreme priest fell. Not dramatically, in the way that the greatest falls are never dramatic. He fell because the accumulated force of everything Kakarot brought against him finally exceeded what any technique, however refined, however ancient, however perfectly executed, could absorb. He fell because even mastery has a ceiling, and Kakarot had, for the first time in this lifetime, and perhaps any other, hit his own ceiling and continued upward. Kakarot stood over him, and in the moment before the final energy was released, he took 1 second to look at the man who had been his teacher,
who had invested years into building what Kakarot became, who had done so with some version of genuine care before the politics of divine order and the fear of ancient memory had overwritten whatever real connection had existed between them. "Rest," he said. It was the kindest thing he had. Then he let the energy go, and the supreme priest was gone. The walk to the throne room was quiet. The remaining divine beings, gods of destruction, some angels who had not fallen in the battle, the attendants and guardians of the universal order, watched from whatever distance felt safe. Some fled. One knelt. Most simply watched with the expression of beings who were witnessing the revision of a history they had been raised to believe was settled. Kakarot entered the throne room. The king of everything was there, had been there through the entire battle, watching through whatever perception a being of his nature used when he chose to observe rather than act. He was very still on his enormous throne, and the expression on his face, Kakarot had to look carefully, had to look past the history of what he had believed that face to mean, was complicated. There was no anger. There was no great defiant authority.
There was, Kakarot thought, something that might have been sadness, or the divine equivalent of it, some recognition buried under the necessary coldness of absolute power of what this moment had cost and could never be recovered. He rose from the throne and walked down the steps to stand before Kakarot on level ground. "You were my friend," the king said. Simple, not a manipulation, a statement of something that was true and insufficient simultaneously. "You were more than my friend," Kakarot replied, "which is why this is harder than anything else has been today." A silence. "You erased my family." No answer, no denial. The king of everything had never been in the business of excuses. "You built a cage for my sister and called it justice." Still nothing. "You looked at someone who trusted you completely, who would have done anything you asked, and the moment he became inconvenient, you decided he didn't exist." Kakarot raised his hand. "I told you I would leave. I told you I would disappear. You could have let us go." His voice didn't rise. If anything, it got quieter, and quieter was more devastating. "You could have chosen differently at every single point, and you chose this." The king closed his eyes. He did not beg. He did not rage. He simply stood, eyes closed, in the particular stillness of someone who has made all of their decisions and has arrived at the place those decisions lead. The energy that consumed him carried the signature of someone who had survived everything it took to get to this moment, and who wished, with a completeness that would never fully resolve, that it had gone any other way. The throne room was empty. Kakarot stood in it for a long time. Then he walked to the throne, and he sat down, and the weight of it, not the physical weight, but the other kind, settled over him like something he had been carrying all along without understanding what it was. He was not happy. He had done what he came to do. He had survived. Kin was free. Vados was alive. Vegeta was an ally. The order that had tried to erase an entire people across 10,000 years had been brought to its accounting. And it felt like nothing. Or not nothing, like something vast and cold and unfinished that would take much longer than this moment to understand. In the aftermath, the pieces fell into new configurations. Vegeta, true to the form of someone who had spent a lifetime defining his own nature, proved his choice not with words, but with action. Moving against the gods who refused to stand down with the decisive efficiency of someone who understood that the new order needed its foundations demonstrated clearly. Valine,
The fusion of angel and ancient, of divine authority and forbidden power, had changed something in both her components that would not fully become apparent until they separated. Kin, when she and Vados divided back into themselves, was quieter. Not calm, not healed, nothing so simple, but different. As if carrying Vados's perspective, even briefly, had installed something that her own experience could not have reached. She still didn't trust the angel. She might never trust the angel in any straightforward way, but when she looked at Vados now, there was something in it besides the automatic hatred, a grudging acknowledgement of something seen from the inside. Vados was careful not to interpret this as more than it was. The deities who survived, who knelt, who chose the new order over the old one, Kakarot treated them with a precision that the ancient king in his memories had not always managed. He was not cruel. He was not merciful in the careless sense. He simply established, clearly and without ambiguity, what the world looked like from this point forward. Those who chose differently were treated to the same clarity, applied differently. Months passed. The divine realm was not destroyed, it was reorganized. Many things remained the same because many things had always been correct in their function and only wrong in their application. Angels continued to guide their universes, gods of destruction continued to maintain balance. The administrative structures that kept existence coherent remained.
Place, staffed now by beings who understood that their authority derived from responsibility rather than from the simple fact of having been here first. Universe 7 fell to Vegeta, who governed it with the specific brand of demanding excellence that was the only mode of engagement he had ever known. The mortals of Universe 7 did not know they had a new king. They went about their lives as they always had. Vegeta let them, which was, in its own way, the most Vegeta thing he had ever done. Kakarot, in the palace that was now his, the same palace, reorganized, its history visible in the architecture the way a scar is visible in healed skin, used the Dragon Bars of the universe with a focus that surprised even those closest to him. His parents returned, his brother restored, the allies lost in the war revived. Margarita. Standing in the throne room that had been the site of so much of this story's worst hours, she looked at him with the same exhausted, genuine warmth she had carried into his cell after 10 years of working for his freedom. He had no sufficient words. He simply bowed his head to her, low, full, the bow of a king to someone whose actions cannot be repaid. She looked for a moment like she was going to say that it was nothing. Then she didn't say it, because they both knew it wasn't, and she was too honest a being to pretend otherwise. "You're welcome," she said instead. Kakarot chose Universe 14 as the home of the restored Raiden people. Not because it was familiar, it wasn't, not in any material sense, but because it was far enough from everything that had happened here to give the people who were being rebuilt a space to become something new, rather than simply trying to reconstruct what had been burned. He spent a day in the palace of the new divine order, setting in place what needed to be set in place. Then he walked through the same corridors he had walked through as a student, as a warrior, as a prisoner, and as a king. He passed the training rooms where Vados had pushed him past every limit he thought he had. He passed the hall where the Omni-Priest had once stood with all of divine authority behind him. At the entrance, Vados was waiting. She fell in beside him without a word, because she had always understood that the things between them that mattered most didn't require words. "Is she settled?" he asked, meaning Cayenne, who had been given rooms in the palace that were large and private and had no chains of any kind in or near them. "She ate 3 things that were definitely not meant to be eaten together," Vados replied, "and is now asleep." She's going to be a significant challenge. Yes. For both of us. Yes. A pause. Are you ready for this? He asked. Her considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Her divine status was gone. The position of supreme priestess, the authority of the angelic order, the security of existing within the structure of universal law, all of it replaced by a different kind of belonging to a different kind of purpose. I've been ready since the moment I chose your side, she said. They walked through the entrance and out into the space beyond the palace, and the universe opened around them the way universes always do, vast and cold and full of things that haven't happened yet. But in the depths of Universe 14, something stirred. Not in any place that the restored divine order could monitor, not in any dimension that Kakarot's awareness reached in its current configuration, focused as it was on the immediate work of rebuilding what had been destroyed. A presence, ancient, patient, and furious. Not a being that had been created within the current divine order, something that predated the order itself, something that watched the war of 10,000 years ago, not as a participant, but as an observer, waiting for the outcome before revealing its interest. A war between the ancient king's people and the divine order. A war that, from the perspective of this presence, had resolved in exactly the wrong direction, not because the king had lost, but because a king who should never have been restored to power was restored to power, and the implications of that restoration, fully understood, stretched far beyond the politics of any single divine realm. The presence had a name spoken in the language of what existed before universes, before gods of destruction, before angels, before the king of everything and the order he had built. And that name, slowly, like a depth charge falling through still water, began its descent toward the surface. Kakarot, ancient king, restored warrior, new sovereign of a rebuilt people, had no idea it was coming. And for the first time since the awakening, something in the universe had every reason to be afraid of him. Next episode, the silence of Universe 14 breaks. A messenger arrives with no origin point. The message has no sender, and Kayin, still fragile at her edges, still learning the difference between instinct and choice, sees something in that message that she recognizes. Something from before the war. Something that was never supposed to have survived it.